Part 3. The Long Way Home. Nobody had a protocol for this. That was the thing Carl kept coming back to as the days settled into their new shape. The enormous impossible creature hovering 3 kilometers off Meridian's bow. The fleet holding a loose perimeter, Sarah's science team working around the clock in the station's main lab, and everyone quietly, collectively figuring it out as they went. He spent 6 hours a day at the observation window now, not at his console at the window. Handheld light signal unit in hand, trading pulse sequences with something that had no name in any language and was approximately the size of a small city but resembled an octopus. They'd moved past prime numbers, past basic geometry, into something that felt less like mathematics and more like conversation, slow, imprecise, full of gaps but unmistakably two minds trying to reach each other across an impossible distance. The crew had started calling it Oscar. Carl wasn't sure when that had happened. One day it was the creature, and the next day it was Oscar, and nobody questioned it. The science team's first approach was the spatial rip. Reproduce the anomaly. Open a door. Send Oscar home the way he came. It failed in 11 different ways across 4 days of attempts. The rip had been a freak occurrence, a collision of subspace conditions so unlikely that Sarah's models suggested it happened once per sector per several thousand years. They could model it. They could describe it mathematically in extraordinary detail. They could not make it happen again. The second approach was navigation. Plot a course to the Varath system and let Oscar fly. Carl ran the numbers. 14 light years at Oscar's observed travel speed meant decades. Maybe longer. They didn't know how he'd been moving when he came through the rip, only how he moved now, which was slowly and with the particular listlessness of something that was lost and tired and a long way from home. He brought the numbers to Sarah. She looked at them for a long time. "There has to be something else," she said. The breakthrough came from Lieutenant Kowalski. He was not a scientist. He was Mercer's chief engineering officer. A practical man who had spent 2 days listening to theoretical discussions with increasing visible discomfort, and who finally said at 2200 on the 4th day, over terrible coffee in the station's lab, what he'd apparently been thinking since day 2. Why don't we just strap warp drives to its tentacles? The room went silent. Not the polite silence of people being courteous about a bad idea. The particular silence of people whose brains had just lurched sideways. Sarah set down her coffee very carefully. "Say that again." Kowalski looked around the room. "I mean, a warp field is a warp field. It doesn't care what's inside it. If you could generate a field large enough to envelop the whole." He gestured vaguely at the observation window. "Organism, and if the organism could direct it through movement, it mimics its natural locomotion," Sarah said. She was already at a console. "The warp field interprets the movement as directional input, and it flies itself home," Carl said from the window. Kowalski shrugged. "I'm just saying." What followed was the most unconventional engineering project in the history of human space exploration. 16 warp drives, pulled from decommissioned vessels in Mercer's fleet, 2 ships that had been running on partial systems anyway, 3 others that could spare non-essential drives without compromising function. Kowalski's team stripped them down and rebuilt them as compact nodes, self-contained, externally mountable, designed to network into a unified field generator when activated simultaneously, 2 per tentacle. Mounting them was the challenge. Oscar had to stay still while shuttle crews worked. A process that required Carl at the observation window for 14 hours a day, trading pulse sequences, explaining through mathematics and light what they were doing and why. Oscar was cooperative in the way that large things are cooperative, mostly with occasional lapses that sent shuttle crews scrambling and once resulted in a node team spending 40 minutes gently extracted from a loosely wrapped tentacle that had simply gotten curious. Chief Engineer Paulson, directing operations from a shuttle, said it was the strangest day of his career. He said it with the expression of a man who meant it as a compliment. On the 9th day, all 16 nodes were mounted and networked. They ran the test at 0800 with every crew member who could find a viewport positioned at 1. Kowalski activated the network from a safe distance. The nodes powered up in sequence, Carl watching from the observation window as Oscar's bioluminescence responded to the field building around him, patterns shifting through colors none of them had seen him use before. Something that looked, if you were willing to project, like wonder. The warp field enveloped him completely. Oscar moved a tentacle. The field responded. He moved another. The field shifted direction. He rippled all 8 in the slow wave motion they'd observed him using in open space, and the field resolved into a coherent heading, pointed without any input from the humans directly toward the Varath system. Sarah made a sound that wasn't quite a word. Carl just watched. The farewell took 3 days to arrange. Not because it was complicated, but because nobody wanted to rush it. Plus, the engineering team was still fine-tuning Oscar's warp array. Sarah's team used the time to push the pulse language as far as it would go, and on the 2nd day, decoding a long sequence Oscar had been transmitting repeatedly since the nodes went live. She went very still at her console. Carl came to look over her shoulder. "Read the translation." looked up at the observation window where Oscar hung in the dark, 16 warp nodes glinting against his skin, bioluminescence cycling in slow, patient waves. He has a mate, Carl said. She's pregnant, Sarah said. They stood with that for a moment. Baby space octopuses, Carl said. That is not the scientific terminology. No, he agreed, but it's what they are. The send-off was everything it should have been. Every viewport on the station occupied. Mercer's fleet holding position in a wide, respectful arc. The alien crew members, Vale and the two others, standing alongside their human colleagues at the observation deck windows without any of the usual careful species distance. Oscar pulsed. Not the mathematical sequences of their working language. Something longer, something that moved across his entire body from central mass to tentacle tips in a slow rolling wave of deep gold, a color none of them had seen him use before. Carl watched it and felt the translation settle in his chest before his brain caught up. He looked at Mercer, who had come to stand beside him sometime in the last few minutes. He's saying goodbye, Carl said quietly. Mercer nodded once, said nothing. There wasn't anything to say. The warp nodes activated. The field built around Oscar in a sphere of blue-white light that grew and steadied and held, and for one long moment he was just there. Enormous and ancient and bioluminescent and inexplicably theirs, this impossible creature they had fought and feared and learned and come to love in the span of 3 weeks. Then he moved. The field resolved into a heading, and he was gone. Just stars where something magnificent used to be. Carl sat back down at his communications console, pulled up a new report file, stared at the blank header for a moment, typed incident report, outpost meridian, spatial anomaly and subsequent events. He turned away from the console, looked at the stars through the viewport and felt his lips tighten into a smile. Goodbye, Oscar. Follow Sci-Fi Shorts for more original sci-fi short stories, HFY, space opera, and life between the stars.